All right, so I guess we can start this one. Thanks everyone for coming to our first People's Assembly. We're really excited to try this out and see how it goes. I'll let the lead facilitators kind of introduce everything and go over the aims. Yeah, thank you for coming. We're still a work in progress, so things won't be perfect probably, but we're excited to try this out. So with that, I will introduce Rosa and Quinn, our two lead facilitators. And we also have Edwin running the technical stuff. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Nick. Yeah, this is exciting. And I loved what you said about that this is a learning process for all of us. Yeah. So this whole first part is totally focused on the learning bit. And it's going to be, I'm going to show some PowerPoints, max 10 minutes. It's going to be really short, but it's just a bit of an overview. And for that, I'm going to share screen. Let's see. Okay. So after, whoops, nope, that's not it. Stop share. So after the PowerPoint, we're going to talk a little bit about this particular assembly and the purpose of it and all of that. But first, we're just going to say a little bit about assemblies in general, so that because it's a new thing that all of us are learning about. But it's actually, okay. All right. So brief history with 3 structural elements and 3 pillars. A little bit about People's Assemblies in XR and multiple purposes of them, and then a little bit about the similarities and differences between the Citizens Assembly, which is one of the demands, and People's Assembly. So brief history, some of you may have seen this before. It's a grassroots method of self-organizing and direct action that has been used in many revolutionary movements. The 3 structural elements is that there's this intro, overview, input. The children's fire is a really lovely thing, which we've not figured out yet how to do online, but it's basically stating the intention that we are doing this for the benefit of the 7th generations. So we're going to do a little bit of an overview, etc. And then we're going to go into small group work and then integration back into the whole group. And the 3 pillars: radical inclusivity, all voices heard and valued equally, active listening, meaning hearing someone all the way through before developing our own responses. So this is not an arena for point scoring or intellectual back and forth, whoops, but rather we're seeking the wisdom of crowds or crowdsourcing. And trust, inviting people to trust the process and to stick to the agreed upon process and to encourage others to do that. So in XR, People's Assemblies are a strategy for internal work like decision-making or input into decision-making. This one is the input into one. We're not going to be making any decisions here. We're just gathering input for a process. They can also be used for external outreach. Have a big in-person People's Assembly in the middle of a park and invite people to come in and express how they feel about what's going on with the climate, etc. A lot of people don't have places where they can talk about these things and be heard. So it can be external outreach, and it can also be part of a direct action. So if there's a direct action that's happening, maybe a decision needs to be taken and people want to involve more people in it. So they'll call for a quick impromptu People's Assembly right in the middle of the demonstration, have people work in small groups, come to, give input back to the main group, and then a decision is made in sometimes as shortly as half an hour. And it's open to anyone who wants to participate and who agrees to the following principles and rules that we've been talking about, to following the principles and rules that we've been talking about. So this is basically what I just said: to build the movement, to engage in direct action, and to do internal organization and decision-making. And just as a bit of context, people's assemblies are one part of future democracy, which is a goal of XR is to be developing new forms of democracy that put decision making back into people's hands. And so people's assemblies are different than citizens' assemblies. The citizens' assemblies are one of XR's four demands, and they're based on sortition, which is like a lottery thing, kind of like how a poll works, that instead of calling up every single person, you call a randomly chosen subset of people. But people's assemblies are something that we can learn to do ourselves with some training, and that's different than the citizens' assemblies, which are much larger, complex, and often require a lot of professional help. And that's why, that's why the demand is for the government to sponsor one. So they wouldn't run one; they would contract with some nonprofit that is respected and that is not going to be a biased group, but it's the citizens assemblies are much harder for people themselves to do. So the differences are important. Basically what I just said, the citizens assemblies are based on sortition, whereas in people's assembly, everyone in the group is welcome. The citizens assemblies, there's often an extended learning process. They're often briefed by experts, et cetera. It's a longer process with multiple meetings, usually much more costly, whereas the people's assemblies are generally a one-session event, less external input needed, and it's a do-it-yourself. So the similarities are important too. They're both a facilitated process. There's support for people to share equally and openly, and there's the creation of a non-judgmental and respectful environment. So hopefully that is clear, but definitely welcome questions. We don't want to spend a lot of time debating any of this because we do want to move into the work of this particular people's assembly. So is it okay to move forward, or is there like any specific confusion that needs to be cleared up right now? So if it's okay to move forward, I'd love to see hand gestures to know. Awesome. Okay. So now I'm going to pass it over to Quinn and Nick to talk about this particular People's Assembly, what our purpose here is, and what we're doing.
So this particular People's Assembly is on XR Nationals, the national chapter of Extinction Rebellion in the United States is restructuring. So about a month ago, the national chapter of XR released a proposal to all the different sub chapters around the country on how they wanted to restructure themselves. And so they gave this, and well, so the strategy team of XR Boston picked this up, and we looked at it and we kind of said, how are we going to sum up everyone's in our chapter's views on this particular issue ourselves? It's an impossible task. So we wanted a more rigorous democratic system for gathering input and really bringing in everyone who wants to join's opinions on this topic, and synthesizing a just not even doing a synthesis, but just getting all those different opinions and then giving those back to XR National to say, like, this is the thoughts and opinions that were present in our chapter on this issue from everyone and not just from the strategy team. So we're going to be looking at two documents today that were, one of them is from XR National, and the other one is another another counter proposal that also came out. And so we're going to be looking at both of those. We're going to be looking at things that we like in those, and we're going to be looking at things that we dislike, and we're going to be gathering input on them to helpfully inform that restructuring process. Do you have things to add, Nick?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that we're not trying to make a decision between the two proposals. This is more looking for things we want to see in a new proposal that comes out of these two. So we're looking for input on things we think would be most helpful to our chapter and that we think would be most beneficial to the movement as a whole, along with things that we think might be difficult or hard to pull off and stuff like that. So we're not going to be voting on anything. This is more just to collaborate together and see what we agree on and what we think the future of XR in the US should look like.
Thank you, Nick. So for example, say this is not it, right? But say this is one proposal and say this is the other. The kind of input that we want is you read through one proposal and you go, oh my gosh, this paragraph here, I really like this. I think that's important. And whatever new thing gets created should have something like that on it. Or you're reading through the other proposal and same thing. It might have some things that you like too. Or you're reading through either one and you say, whoa, I don't think this particular thing would work very well, right? So we're just looking for elements that we like from either one that should be included in whatever new third one gets created. We're also looking for things that we are concerned about that are in either of them that we don't want to see moving forward. And ideally, if you can say why, or if you can even better come up with an alternative, like instead of doing it the way that this thing says, I think it should happen some other way, because then that's more specific input for whoever it is who is crafting the third proposal. Does that make sense?
And I also shared the two proposals in the chat, and we're going to give some time for people to look through those because I'm sure most of us haven't read through them thoroughly.
Yeah, so as you look through them, if you could actually do that with paper and pencil in hand so that you can make some notes about what are the parts of each that you like and what are the parts of each that you may not like. So we're going to give, I think, about 10 minutes for this. Yeah? I'm going to set the timer. Okay, so that felt short in one way and long in another way. Did everybody have a chance to read both of those? Cool. Who here was already familiar with both of these before? Awesome. Yeah, I was really hoping we wouldn't have a lot of people who were looking at this for the first time, especially because it looks like the second one has expanded from the last time that I saw it, which is great, but it just means more pages and more detail and all like that. Okay, so so we have a slightly smaller turnout than we had thought. And so it's looking like maybe for the small groups, we might have 2 small groups or 3 small groups. Well, you know, we could actually, oh, I forgot. There's 2 people who don't want to be in small groups, right? So, and you have their names, right? So we
Who were they again? So,
who does not want to be in small groups? Amanda did not want to be in a small group. And Kendall, I believe you had said you didn't want to be in a small group. Is that correct?
I said yes. Count me out since I only
and
just
Tim-
joined.
Okay, so we have 12 minus 3. So we have 9. So 1 group of 4 and 1 group of 5. So let me just say a little bit about what we're going to be doing in the small groups. So as mentioned before, we're going to be being inclusive, we're going to be active listening, and we're going to be trusting the process. And as the process pieces, and in terms of the content, we would really like to hear specifically from people. Is there something that you liked in one of the that you want to see in whatever the proposal is moving forward? Is there something that concerns you about one of the proposals that you want to, or both? This concerns me about this one. This concerns me about this other one, right? This isn't just any likes that you have about either and any concerns that you have about either. And we will have facilitators in the small groups. And the point of having facilitation is to really make sure that we do active listening, and each person's contribution is going to be reflected back to that person's satisfaction, so that that person actually feels heard, whether by the facilitator or by someone else before the next one speaks. So we just want to make sure that not only does everybody get a chance to speak, but that everybody has a chance to feel heard. And we're also going to be taking notes in the document. Could we, oh yes. Edwin, if you could share that with all of us, I think that's what you meant to do. Edwin is sharing the
document. It was shared. The link is in there.
Yeah, but you sent it to me privately. So
sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. If you could send it to all of us there, great. So that's going to be the document where all of the calls are going to be recorded too, but it takes a long time to go through the recorded calls afterward. And we're also going to want to be reporting out when we come back together. So we're going to need a harvest of the points that have come up before we have time to actually process the recording. So that's why we need both written recording as well as the recording on tape. So that said, any questions about what we'll be doing in the small groups? Okay, so Edwin, what will we need to do to have the other small group recorded? Because I'm taking it you're going to be on one, so you can make sure
I'll be recorded. You'll be in the second group, and if you want to record, you should have record permissions, and Nick has record permissions too. But if you want to,
okay, awesome. So you've made the small groups already?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
So, and everybody will go into them, and you have the notes there, or page.
And the notes page, great.
You can see your facilitator, group 1 and group 2, and who's in the groups.
Awesome. Cool. So what's going to happen is we're going to be getting a little thing on our screen that says you've been invited to join a group. And then at that point, you just click on that. 10 minutes before the end of the time in the small groups, you'll see a message saying we have 10 minutes to wrap up. It's going to be about 45 in all. And at that point, just please go back over your notes on the document and make sure that you have all of the various perspectives that were shared in your group. And then there'll be a little thing that appears when it's time to come back. It's a little countdown thing that will be like, in 60 seconds, you will rejoin the large group. And you can click on it, in which case you'll come back immediately, or else you can just wait and then you'll automatically come back. But in order to go into the groups, you do need to click. So, all right.
Okay, group 1, Nick is facilitating, in group 2, Quinn.
Okay. And so you're going to be sending the little invitation for us to go into the groups?
Yeah, I just see that Nick had something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Nick?
Rosa, did you want to just quickly kind of intro the modified empathy circle we're going to be using?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I thought I did. So we're going to be, but thank you. We're going to be making sure that what each person says is reflected back so that that person feels heard. The facilitator can do this if needed. A slightly more advanced practice is for the next person who wants to speak to first say back what they heard from that person to that person's satisfaction so that that person feels heard, and then they take a turn to speak. But if you want to speak and you're not able to do that, the facilitator is there, so they can always just reflect back what that first person has said, so that, to clarify any misunderstandings or to help make sure that they feel heard. So this is a form of active listening, which is one of the pillars of the People's Assembly. Okay? All right. Cool.
Okay, I should see a notice there.
All right.
Okay. Yep.
So, I guess we have a volunteer who wants to share first. Also, Edwin, are you taking notes, or should we pass that around to different folks?
I can take notes, sure. And if anyone else wants to too, I'm not the best note taker, so yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, who wants to go first? Monty or Alan or Amanda or Virginia?
Are we going to start by I know that there's a very general kind of respond to both these documents. I'm wondering if we want to structure this with a slightly more focused question in some way.
Yeah, do we want to go? I mean, I think it's easier to kind of respond to both and kind of pick out the stuff you like and don't like from both. So yeah.
I can just sort of get it started rolling with some thoughts, and then we can see where things go.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right. So in a lot of ways, it seems like there's agreement between the idea that there should be organization at multiple different levels, local, regional, and national. I think both of these documents kind of recognize the need for that. And then especially the second one seems like it's in some ways a reaction to feeling like a lack of trust of the existing national team as it is, right? They mentioned sort of lack of transparency and accountability, and a fair amount of the second document seems like it is kind of drawing us, especially in these sort of tables at the end. There's just like, what is the national team is trying to do and what is wrong with that and we think needs to be different. So I've sort of had different reactions to reading that, right, I was kind of with them part of the way, and then I saw this almost very kind of oppositional language, shook me back a little bit. But then I kind of got to the point of like, if they're expressing real concerns that they wanted to come out and like make this sort of publicly raise these concerns, I want to be make sure there's space for that as well and really consider them.
Do you mind if I just kind of
Please.
reflect that back? So I'm hearing that while there is general consensus between these two documents, that there is these different levels of national and regional and local structures that need to be established, that the second document seems to be directly addressing some issues they have with the current national structure along the lines of transparency and accountability. And that, yeah, that there's some disagreement in the second document with how the structure is currently and what the proposal, the first proposal, is trying to do. Is that?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Do you have anything else you want to add, or do you want to pass off to someone else for now?
I'm happy to pass it along, and I'll jump back in at some point.
Okay. Alan, did you want to go?
Sure. I will start with XRUS National, the first proposal. I think that in multiple places, I would like to see input from not just the XRUS team in decision making, specifically with relationship to adding and removing members to the team. It's kind of like self-governance, and to me is worse than our current democracy in terms of like getting input on who should be in positions of power. And then I would also like to see that on the fundraising. I thought it was interesting that the budget would be decided by the people on XRUS without input, and that the budgets that would be considered would be only XRUS working groups and not any disbursement or consideration of disbursement to local levels, despite them using the name of XRUS to fundraise nationally, including across regions.
Can I just reflect that back so we have the main points from that? Is that all right?
Yeah.
So I'm hearing that, so the current structure in the proposal from draft 1 doesn't allow for much input other than the national team as it currently stands on who's going to be part of it, and will oversee a lot of the decision making without input from the local chapters. Is that kind of your main point there?
Yeah, except specifically the addition and removal of members and finalizing budgets are two that I think are important points of decision making.
Okay.
And I did like the criteria for consideration for people to be added and removed from the national team. Thought that they were well thought out, but I wondered how we would measure a violation of principles. And you know, I can say, as in my time as a liaison to the national team, can cite numerous violations of principles. But you know, also think that a lot of people can violate the principles once and still be valuable contributors to the movement. So just like that boundary and like how do you moderate that seems difficult.
Okay, so while you do agree with a lot of the criteria that have been set out for adding and removing someone from the national team, there's concerns that it's hard to kind of decide what is the line for some of them, specifically the breaking of principles, because that's kind of subjective sometimes and can be difficult. Yeah.
Yep. And so I guess moving on to the regional, I like that one, especially the chart that shows the aims of what the different levels are controlling, seems to push power further down and more distributed. And so the decisions being made at higher levels seemed less. Still didn't, however, it did not resolve the issues of, what is the national working group structure and decision-making structure for the things at the national level. So I liked that it was moving more of those decisions down, even though it didn't resolve the high-level decision-making.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that proposal 2, while it starts to develop a good structure that is kind of decentralizing the decision-making, it doesn't have a specific layout for how that would look at a national level and how those decisions would be made. So it still has some work to do on that front.
Yep. And I can check and move it to someone else.
Okay. Monty, would you like to hop in?
Sure. To me, there are a few significant differences between the groups, the two proposals. The national proposal is essentially a self-perpetuating body, like a kind of board of directors. The regional groups is an elected body. I'll just point out that I much prefer the latter. The second is, Alan raised the point on removing people. In an elected body, as I read the regional one, whoever sent the regional that sends to the national has a recall power, in essence. One might want to add to it that if a person, for whatever reason, ends up on the national and is completely disrupted, may not get recalled, but maybe the national has to be able to deal with that too. Similar from local to regional. And basically, I think that's a good process. I would just add in that the national has a right to say you can't be simply disruptive if some mistake is made and for whatever reason the regional isn't dealing with it. It's unlikely, but one might have it.
Can I just wrap those points up?
Sure.
Thank you. All right, so you like the decentralized structure of the second proposal because it allows for more say in who is making these decisions, and less like the first proposal, which is this currently self-selected body that will, under their proposal, continue to kind of hold the decision-making power. The second proposal kind of spreads that out to the regional and allows for more electability and recall. Is that close?
Yeah, I just emphasized that one is self-perpetuating and the other is elected. To me, that's otherwise, yeah, I think fine. I think they both, in different ways, talk about roles and mandates. I think that whenever this gets finalized, both need to be looked at and thought through. I have not done that in any detail, and I don't think this is the right space to do it, but both of them have something to say, despite the claims at the end of the regional that the national did not. But I'm ignoring what amounts to a trash of the national at the end of it. And I think it was just simply a misrepresentation in places. But looking at the actual content, I think they both had some stuff. I think the national had good on working groups and listing them. I think the regional really didn't go into that at all, but more kind of who's going to do what, which I would also like to look at a little more carefully. In that sometimes I think things are suggested the national would do, but they're the kinds of terrain that might even be done at the local level. So I think there's that. The national did say that basic decisions are really local, and I think any would do that. And both of them affirmed all 4 demands and the 10 principles. And I think we should, just to say we should stick with that. And lastly, for now, the regional had this distinction between stewardship and operations. And I'm not sure what I think about that. On one level, it sounds good in principle. On the other, it just sounds like it could be cumbersome. And where are the lines between these two, and who does what and why? So I'm unsure about that one. I'm just agnostic on it. There was another one of those. Oh, consensus versus consent. Modified consensus versus consent. I'm not sure quite what the consent one is. I understand modified consensus. It makes more sense to me than what was listed as consent, with the implication that something is agreed to unless someone objects. It's like, what? There's no process. There's no. So I don't. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. And the last one is the regional called for, in effect, a constitutional convention. I know that's been discussed about on the national key base, various channels, and I think that is the way to resolve this, is for different locals to have reps, and that could be a lot of people, but we're gonna have to figure that out, because otherwise I don't know how we make a decision that's actually binding on us.
Okay, so if I miss anything that you said, feel free to remind me, but I'm hearing that you think a good process going forward to kind of ratify whatever decision we do make on these proposals is a kind of national convention where we have reps from all these different local groups that can have a say in how things go going forward. And also, sorry, drawing a blank.
Unsure about stewardship versus operations.
Stewardship versus operations. So
Regional.
that there's not enough definition to some of the things in the regional proposal as far as the working groups and the distinction between those two things. So that needs to be defined more going forward if we're going to pursue that. You liked the working group proposals from the first document and think that that could possibly be carried over to the second document.
Yeah, using that and the chart, there's a way to start sorting out the different, what do you actually want to do?
Yeah.
And the last is the question of the modified consensus versus consent.
Yeah, so
Thinking I prefer modified consensus, but I'm not sure I understand consent well enough.
okay. And I also heard that you felt that the chart at the bottom of the second proposal may have been a little off base on what was proposed in the first, and that you would prefer to have kind of a more constructive debate rather than one proposal trying to trash another.
Well, just when we have a proposal, we will make our debate, our positions on it as we go through it. But there's a proposal, that's more discussion about why their proposal is better than the proposal itself. It's an argument, not a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Amanda, I know you didn't want to go, but if you have anything you want to say, we'd be happy to hear it.
To be honest, I'm only partially listening. I'm sorry. I'm
Okay.
trying to do something else too.
No problem. Would someone be willing to listen while I go through my thoughts? Alan? All right, awesome. So, I agree with a lot of what has been said already. I do prefer the second proposal's regional basis for organizing. I think that kind of decentralized structure that then feeds into the national is a better way forward than having a kind of centralized national body. But with that said, I do think there's the possibility of incorporating kind of a board of directors sort of thing with some maybe thought leaders or kind of supervisory roles for maybe indigenous leaders if they don't want to participate at a more active level. So I don't think we necessarily need to eliminate the kind of centralized national team that there is now, but maybe transition them to a different sort of supervisory role where they're not making decisions as much as they are just kind of maybe helping with trainings or interfacing with local groups.
Sorry, can I pause and reflect that back?
Yeah, definitely.
So between the two proposals, you liked the direction the second one was going in that it gave more power to a regional structure and had less power in the national structure. But you do think that there may still be an ongoing role for national, and it may end up being more of a supervisory capacity, possibly including specific perspectives like Indigenous leaders in that group.
Yeah. All right. And I like what the first proposal had as kind of their goals for the national team, which was like helping local groups get set up, providing them with a list of resources and everything. And I think the second proposal has that as well, from even like the international database with everything. I think that the interfacing with international that's proposed in the second one is good. I think the more we can kind of collaborate with Global South XR groups and other groups is good, but we do have to be careful not to work with, like, there's some issues with stuff going on in certain areas, like XR UK has some issues that may not be ideal for us to collaborate on. I think the recall and accountability of the national team, whichever proposal is decided on, is important to have the local groups have some say in that, as Alan and everyone else had mentioned, I think. And my concern with the regional proposal is, the main one I have is probably that a lot of local groups probably don't have the bandwidth to participate in something like that. So it's possible that, I think it's a good goal to be heading towards that, but I think there is some possible growing pains where people aren't able to participate except for from the larger chapters. So it might end up being New York City and Boston run and DC run the Northeast, whereas the Midwest might have only a few people capable of collaborating on that stuff. So that is a potential issue, I think, on that.
Great. So on the, I'm going to kind of do it in reverse order. On the regional level, there may be a problem where earlier stage chapters may not be able to have someone liaising to the body, and larger chapters who are more established will control the conversation. And the second point was that the recall element and input into who's on in different positions was an important element of the regional proposal, and was not included in the national proposal. And the last one, I forgot. It had to do with international and like outside of US relationships. Yeah, just that the national team should help kind of interface local groups with not only other groups in the region, but internationally, and have a good broad set of resources that groups can use. Yeah, thank you for listening. Yeah. So, does anyone have any other points they want to raise? If not, we can maybe start kind of going through what we have now and maybe condensing them to main points. Okay. Mine is, I have a response. Is it okay to do a response? Yeah. So I was going to just share the context for the reason that the second proposal has language that contrasts to the first proposal is just the order in which these proposals were written. So the first one was written and there was like a couple days given for people to give feedback to it. And I think that given like the rush time and stuff, I felt like the second proposal was responding to not just creating a positive frame of what they thought, but also responding to the thing that, so I think they were kind of combining two things into a proposal. So I think it's, yeah, for what it's worth, I think that's why that happened. Okay, so yeah, that the second proposal is not only a proposal on the structure moving forward, but also a response to the first proposal as well. Virginia?
I just wanted to kind of amplify what you said about representation in XR International. I didn't actually see that mentioned in either one of these proposals. If it was very brief, and I think that as actually an important piece of the mandate for any national team would be, advocating for things like the fourth demand in international settings.
Building off that point, talking about international makes me wonder why there is a national structure, just like every other group liaises. Like, we end up with local, regional, national, international. And that seems like a lot for a decentralized structure. And a lot of other chapters are just going directly to international. So I kind of wonder why we think these levels are important when they aren't happening elsewhere.
Yeah, so
if I may, I think the value of that, one, we are a huge country, and a lot of chapters all over the place. And I think an ability to think on a national focus, and besides, this is the most powerful nation in the world. And so being able to counter that requires a national focus, and to leap from regional to international doesn't make sense. On the other hand, we're so big that going from local to national is difficult. So it seems to me there's a value to a structure here if we're just clear on the different things. The second is, to my knowledge, the US remains the only nation, in effect, with something like the fourth command. Maybe a few others have done it, but generally not. And I think it's really important. I mean, I think it needs to be strengthened and made more as a planetary concept, not just a national concept. But nonetheless, we should at a minimum retain it. And I think, as Virginia mentioned, to go in and advocate for it is easier to do as a national. And I think it's worth having a unifying, just ultimately a unifying national presence. So I would definitely want to retain a national body that is for the not very many things that needed to be decided nationally. There aren't that many. But for example, maybe we want to strengthen demand for. Who's going to do that process if not a national body? Dealing with Roger Hallam's and all that he's erased. There wasn't even a statement. There is no there to make a statement. I guess that the national body didn't feel that they should. If we have delegated people to do the certain delineated tasks, we can get them done. But again, I certainly agree that most of the decision making on most of what we do is best done at the local level, next to the regional, and on up the tree. So the higher you go. So international doesn't necessarily have any particular binding beyond the principles that we hold to. And even there, as we now know, those are not, the principles seem to be the same everywhere. The demands maybe not. There's 3 demands in most places and 4 in our case.
So I'm just going to wrap up the last couple points I've heard. So Virginia, you echoed that collaborating with international is important just to have a shared vision across the world. And also, I think I might be interpreting for myself, but being able to kind of signal boost certain struggles in different areas of the world, so that some of the typically marginalized voices can be better heard in larger contexts. Alan, you then raised that you think that it may not be necessary to have almost a formal national body here, and that there is ability for the regions to kind of collaborate with themselves and also with the international community as a whole, and less of a need for a national kind of group to determine that sort of thing. And then Monty, you responded to that saying it's important to have a national group so that we can set a shared vision, since we are the most powerful country in the world and have contributed the most to the climate crisis. and that you think it's important to have the national group so that we can send out messages and responses to certain things, such as Roger Hallam. And yeah, did I miss anything? Good.
And so I was going to say about the idea of having a person who's tasked with messaging for all of XRUS. To me, that's like ceding a lot of power to a single person to speak on behalf of a nation, especially, as you pointed out, such a large nation. And so I question, like, even if we would be in agreement with them, in some cases, like for you, speaking against Hallam, I wonder if they would maybe say something on behalf of all XRUS that you wouldn't have had input into. And I think that is where I start to question why I believe that we should question for everything that we cede power to national, why, and will we be happy with that in all cases?
Okay, so concern over giving one person or one small group too much power to speak for everyone when we are a diverse country and the regions have different needs and people have different ideas of what's right and wrong. Yeah, just concern of ceding too much of that to a centralized group, whereas maybe there's a possibility of having more collaborative statements or something of that nature. Virginia.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern, and it's a concern about the way that things have kind of evolved without having a deliberate process, especially, right? Where one thing that really stood out to me about the first document is it's written as we, the national team, but there's no individuals identified. It was only by kind of looking at the metadata, I saw Lisa Fithian had written it, who I actually respect a lot and talked to her a few times. But I would have liked to see feel a sense of like they're trying to be accountable, you know, even who are these people, right? What is the process for, besides there's an email address that you can contact if you want to volunteer or to kind of try to join the national team. I would have liked to see more around, yeah, process for integrating input from regional or local groups.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that the first document, while it talks from a perspective of people on the national team, but doesn't necessarily give context for who they are or what they have been doing, and maybe it sounds like it would be beneficial to kind of get the kind of synopsis from the national team of how things have been working over time and how decisions have been being made and any issues they may have faced, even to see what we need to improve on with these proposals. I think just coming from, if I may add my own point, just having an idea of how things have been working would be beneficial to determining how to move forward.
Thanks.
Monty?
So partly, I mean, I guess I heard from Alan, in a sense, two things. One is why have a national at all, and the other is any national needs to be very careful in what power we give it. I agree with the first, and I agree with the second and not the first. I think we need it for some with limited power. I think both organizations, both proposals actually say the primary purpose here is to assist others, not to make decisions about things. But there are, I think both of them recognize some need at times for national level decisions. And one of them proposes really, in effect, if there are to be decisions, it's this self-perpetuating body. And the other says, whenever these kind of decisions get made, we have, in effect, an elected body that comes out of the regional. And as I said already, I prefer the elected body in any case. And certainly, yeah, we have to be very careful about what authority we give it. And at times then, even if we say, okay, we don't want this elected body to make this kind of decision, it may turn out that this kind of decision needs to be made, and somebody's got to set up the process so that it gets made, i.e. how do you consult with everybody in order to do it? And at what's a sufficient level of agreement? I mean, yes, a statement on Hallam I might not have liked, but if it went through a legitimate process in an organization I respect and am part of, I live with it. If I can't live with it, I leave maybe, but that's what everybody does. Doesn't mean no decisions get made at times.
Yeah, so I'm hearing that you agree that we need to be careful what power we give national to make these sort of decisions, but at the same time, it is important to establish these structures and processes so that we feel comfortable with what we are allowing, or not allowing, but having national do, so that while we may not agree with 100% of what happens out of it, if we're comfortable with how the process was done, then we're more likely to not be set off such that we want to leave the group altogether. Edwin?
Yeah, I was supposed to give a 10-minute warning. So we're almost at that point. So what should I set? The message is just there's a 10-minute warning. This is for sort of a wrap up or final.
Okay.
So, and there's also the document. I put notes in there and they're not the best. So if anybody wants to go in and edit, so I'll just let you know that.
All right. I think it'd be good if we could kind of have a final list of like pros and cons, I guess. Does that make sense to everyone? For like what we like, either from both or what we don't like, and break it down that way. So we can just kind of go through each point and see how much agreement there is on each.
Just checking, did that message go out? Did you get a little announcement? Okay, I just want to be sure this stuff works. Yep. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So working group proposals from the first proposal. Is there agreement that those were in general good, or do we feel do we think that there needs to be more work done onto those, or?
I'm not sure they're exactly the right set, but I like the way that they've tried to lay out specifically what are the aims of national, what are its responsibilities. I think maybe even a hybridizing that list with the kind of table with columns for local, regional, national, to kind of figure out like, yeah, what is within the remit of groups at each level.
Okay, so we like the kind of breakdown of working groups, although maybe not specifically saying that it's a, I think the word.
Exactly that list.
Yeah, like I'm not sure that it mentions an art that would be supporting national actions, and I'm not sure what national actions are, and what, like, if art being done at the national level has a specific, like that kind of details that I don't think we need to send as feedback at this point, but that the exercise of going through and enumerating what are all the kind of the work to be done within each level is the right next step.
All right, so
possibly
what I have
within a constitutional gathering. I want to just say that.
Okay, so what I have for this point is we like the idea of enumerating the working groups. We think we need to think more deeply about what those will look like, and possibly use the constitutional. I guess that'll be a separate point. We think
Yeah,
the
let's put that as another
constitutional convention with representatives from all locals would be a good way to kind of ratify anything that we decide on for a proposal.
Are we all in agreement with that latter one? I'm just conscious that we only have a few minutes. So if we're in agreement that we would want the constitutional convention model, then yes. If not, that's okay.
I just
Whatever
don't
you-
know what a constitutional convention model is. I mean, I get having one representative from each chapter, I guess.
Okay, so maybe, well, I'll say some of us want a constitutional convention with representatives, but we'll also note we need to be clear what that would look like and have a clear process on that so people will feel comfortable. That getting your, yeah.
I'm not against it. I just don't know. I don't know what I'm committing to. I agree that there needs to be representation on the input.
Nick, I just want to suggest that we, you list a topic and we don't have time to retalk them all.
Right.
To just see what degree of agreement we have. So for example, do we agree that we want elected versus self-appointed? Which do you prefer?
Okay.
See where we're at.
All right. So yeah, elected versus kind of self-selected. Who here likes elected, kind of decentralized? Okay, so everyone agrees that. Elected body greater than self-elected. All right.
What about the statement of, oh, sorry, you can moderate. You're moderating, right?
No, you can do it because
Okay.
I'm trying to take notes on this too.
Okay. I was going to throw out the one that I thought we had some agreement on, which was as much power as possible to the local level and thoughtful selection of what needs to be at the national level.
Well said.
Can you, sorry, repeat that?
As much power as possible to the local level and thoughtful selection of powers given to the national level.
Okay. And do we have group consensus on that? I think I'm good with that.
What about the idea that there is a regional structure, that regional is helpful versus just national local? Regional?
Okay.
Another idea is this question of modified consensus versus consent. Do we have I prefer the modified consensus as described versus consent, knowing that the details have to be fleshed out.
I don't know. I'm not sure about that one, but
Okay.
we can note that tool for support modified consensus.
Yeah, maybe, and clarity of decision making and how that happens. Definitely. I don't feel like I understand either of those proposals well enough to kind of say a preference between them.
Do we want to say something about this question of removal? That in addition to electing the regional, et cetera, the local to the regional to the national has the power to recall? We want to make that explicit? I do, but.
All right.
Okay.
So we'll note that we think there needs to be some local and regional recall ability and appointment ability. Is that?
Yeah, well, that's built into the regional. It's the regional sense to the national. The question is, does the regional have the power to then go, wait a minute, we don't like what you're doing. You haven't represented us properly for anyone. Hopefully not, but.
Right. Recall.
And you mentioned a process that if someone is not participating well at the level they've been sent to, that group can decide they have to leave as well. Send back for another representative, I guess.
Okay. Do we want to say we like I know Alan had mentioned in proposal 1 the kind of parameters for recall or like recall of a national member, just that general idea that having some principles where we can decide how members are removed if necessary, or do we? Yeah, I don't know.
I like the list, but then thought that the principles are hard to monitor in practice. And people have very different, I've had just so many national conversations where like yesterday someone was like, Hallam by doing Heathrow violated a principle. And I like followed up with them in a private chat. And I was like, great, can you tell me what principle that was? And they said mitigate for power. And then we had to have this like 5-minute conversation where I was like, that's actually distributed non-centralized decision making, and it's the same as the tube action, and that's not mitigating for power as a problem because anyone in XR can make a wrong choice with an action against the better judgment of the group, or that's how that's been running. Anyway, so I think there's like, what is the definition in the practice? I don't know that I'm in agreement that we should just like, without more clarity, I don't think we can say we have to abide by the principles or removed, because then it gets like personal and political, like what is the definition?
Okay, I don't think we need to get too specific. So what if I just say we want to see a set definition and plan for recall if necessary? So just that needs to be explored more, and we want to see that.
There was another piece that they both mentioned, which is some role for frontline communities, and we're now down to 50 seconds. Do we want to say the national needs to build that in?
Yeah.
So we want to have the national, one of the goals of national to promote kind of the frontline and indigenous.
No, it's that in the structure, there would be some defined role for coordinating with, paying attention to. I think it's still awful vague. There was just these passing references in a sense. The question is, do we want, as we build out a national, do we want to say we need to give particular attention to this question of frontline groups? 10 seconds.
I think that touches on the advisory board, bringing in like voices that we want to be amplifying too.
Wow. You're just joining now. Okay, so you'll get to see the work that the small groups were doing. Good. Cool. All right.
Oh, if you're recording, Rosa, you can stop.
Oh, thank you. I thought I did. Oh, I see. I stopped and then you're still recording. Got it. So that's why it says recording. Cool. All right. Well, so just curious to see with our hand signals, if you enjoyed your group experience, if it was like kind of mezzo, or if you did not enjoy it. Woo! All right. Very cool. Okay, so our small group just had a lovely exploration. So now I think it's time for us to review the hand signals, because we're going to be using them a lot in this last part, right? So if someone wants to say something, just, point like that. We're not going to use the jump the queue one, but I agree If someone wants a clarification of something that has been said, there's a C, or like a technical point is a T. And if somebody isn't hearing people and want to hear them speak up, just kind of please signal like that. Okay. Awesome. So what we thought we would do when we were designing this is that instead of having one group do a long report out and then the second group have to wait and do theirs, and also to avoid duplication of items, that we would do this part by asking one group to say one thing that they wrote down on their list, right? And then we would ask if the other group has the same item, right? And if the other group has the same item, then we don't need to repeat it later on. So you don't need to read everything that's on your list. You just need to repeat.
I think you got muted there. I don't know what happened.
Rosa seems to have
I don't know
been
if she's
frozen.
frozen, yeah. Hopefully she comes back on in a second. I think what she was saying is if something gets said, we don't have to repeat it. So we'll go back and forth until we've covered all the different things.
Okay, so let's just, okay, so we can start with going back and forth between the notes. Would anyone like to be the kind of note reporter from the first group?
Is that a?
Yeah, that's you, Nick.
Yeah, I can do that.
Sure. And would anyone else like to be the note reporter from the second group? Oh, Rose is back. Okay. Rosa, would you like to continue what you were saying before?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm writing down the Zoom number because if that happens again, that I have a technical glitch, I'm going to try and get on Zoom via my phone. Because, yeah, okay. So just one thing from each group, and then with each thing, we'll do a show of hands to see how many people agreed with that. And then we'll proceed from there. And if you have a concern, we'll also ask for a concern. So if people don't agree with it or have a concern, we'll ask, and then you'll, put up a figure and we'll count how many. So would Nick's group be willing to start by naming one thing from your harvest that you want to share?
Yeah, so we all agreed that we think having kind of a regional structure between local and national is good. We think that would be a helpful thing to have going forward.
Okay, so can we see wavy hands for everyone who likes having a regional structure between a local and a national one? Cool. And then does anyone have any concerns about that? Okay. Yes, Quinn.
Yeah, I was just wanting to say that I both support it and have concerns about it. So
Cool.
Count me for both.
And
Yeah.
so what we're going to do for the concerns is right now, if you could give like a newspaper sentence headline, like a 6 to 8 word headline of your concern, because we're going to come back to the concerns afterward, but we just want to note them now.
I'm concerned that it might overcomplicate things and draw too many resources.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So our note taker is taking notes of this, yes? Is Edwin still? Yes, Edwin's still here. Okay, great. So if you could just note down that there was both universal agreement with having a regional and also a concern and what the concern was. Okay, so now over to group one, or not group one, over to the group that Quinn was in. Was there something to share from our...
Well, does anyone else feel strongly about wanting to share, or should I share?
we all have the notes on the document, so it really could be anyone.
I guess I'll share. Okay. So let me just scroll down to it. Someone in our group stated that they liked the explicit preamble. In the explicit preamble, they liked that the national group wasn't to be seen as being in charge of the local groups.
Agreement on that? And if you have a concern, then raise your... Okay, so general agreement, no major concerns about not wanting to have the national group as being in charge or being seen as being in charge, yeah? Okay, cool. Back to Nick's group.
Yeah, so our group felt that the idea from the second proposal of having national be this kind of elected body coming out of regions is favorable to having kind of the self-selected model that the first proposal talked about, and that has been used so far. We think it's better to have a elected positions on national so that there can be recall.
Okay, so people like having elected positions on the national so that there can be recall. Yeah? Yes? And that is in the second proposal, right? So that's something in the second proposal that people like. And there's a concern, yes, or clarification, Alan.
Clarification. I just wanted to add that it's, and also specifically not appointed, like self-appointed.
Not self-appointed, but representative. So who here is in favor of not self-appointed, but representative? And are there any concerns or additions to that? Yes.
Just a quick clarification. I think what we meant was that not elected so they can be recalled, but elected and they can be recalled.
Right, elected and they can be recalled. And just as a point of information, there was a lot of things around that in the other group as well. People mentioned that what they didn't like from the first proposal was that national would still be picking their own members. And in our group, the alternative was proposed that either representative delegates or sortition. So I just want to get a show of hands of how much support is there in this group for the alternative of sortition as an alternative, possible alternative to representatives. Okay.
I'm unsure how that would work in the context of sortition rather than from all citizens, but from all XR members.
Yes, from all XR members.
I think that would be balanced with how much time commitment it is to be on the national team and who's able to do that.
Yeah. So would it at least make sense that people here are in favor of exploring the concept of sortition in addition to representation? Okay, but not self-selection, not the group appointing its own members. Okay.
Monty, did you have something to add? I saw you
No,
put
that exploration solves it, thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I thought you shared Virginia's concerns.
Okay, so now back to something from Quinn's group.
Yep.
They don't have to be going down the list. You can just choose whatever seems most important.
Okay. Well, I think so that I don't seem to be just being arbitrary, I'll go down the list. But
Okay.
yeah. So another thing that we liked about the first proposal, or at least some people in our group liked about the first proposal, was that it was clear in its enumeration of the powers of the national team, and the function of the national team, the responsibilities of the national team, and that in the final proposal, the function of the national teams needs to be clear.
And there's a clarification and a concern. Yes, Alan.
Are we agreeing to what national laid out as their powers, or we just like that they are clear? Like we're saying,
Yeah.
we like clarity.
We like clarity.
the clarity, and we would like for the final one to be equally clear about what are the functions of the national. And we're appreciating that the first proposal had clarity about that, not necessarily agreeing with their points. Yeah. Cool. All right, back over.
Clarification.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pam.
That's okay. I just wanted to add that we also had said that the table that was in the second proposal from the regional group that very clearly set out what happens at each level was really useful. And I think that that folds in with this point.
Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. Cool, so back over to you, Nick.
Yes. We had broad agreement that as much power as possible should be left at the local level, and that we should be careful about what we kind of delegate to a national level, so that there's not too much power to national and that's taking away from local organizing.
Any concerns or any different perspectives? And I didn't see your hands, Ellen, so I'm just checking in with you to, yeah, okay, cool. All right. So back over to you, Quinn.
Yep. This one, the next one has already been said. This one has already been said. Another thing that we was broad disapproval about the first proposal was that national can not only select but also dismiss its own members. And we said, or at least some of us said, that perhaps as an alternative, that power could be vested in some other independent body to dismiss members from national.
So the point being that, if I may reflect back a bit, Quinn, the point being that having the responsibility for both choosing your own people and then also dismissing own people makes it too much concentration of power. And so that at the least, those two powers should be separate. What's people's take on that? Yeah, point of clarification, Monty?
I don't know, it's clarifications. In our group, we talked about doing this. We were clear we wanted, in effect, an elected body, although we now hear sortition. But we also considered that a person could be considered either not performing or dysfunctional by the national body, and the regional isn't acting on it, and the national body needs to be able to have such people leave under some clear agreements. I think we were generally in agreement. I don't know if there was a strong agreement, but I think that was a concern. And personally, I would now say that having yet another body to decide removal, it just starts to become too organizationally cumbersome.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you have a concern that it could be too cumbersome to have another body deciding on the removal, and
Rose is muted again.
I think she heard. Oh, we didn't mute. Oh, there you go.
Oh,
Back.
she's back.
Is it working, Rosa?
Are you back, Rosa?
I think her computer might be acting up.
Okay, so is, I guess, to form another way of what Monty said is Monty is concerned that another body might be too organizationally cumbersome. Is there support for that? Can we have a show of hands for that? Or are there other concerns about that?
I had a first point, which is that we talked about, and there was at least some agreement that the national body would have the right to remove members if they were non-performing or creating a lot of just dysfunction.
Mhm.
Like,
And
what's gonna
so,
show up to me?
Yeah, so I'm gonna suggest as a point of process that we come back to this. Oh, I'm gonna, we come back to this. Oh,
We're just getting an echo there, trying to figure out.
yeah,
how
I just
to-
jumped off of my computer, so I can't see you all at the screen at the same time. So someone else is gonna have to monitor, like, you know, the hands and all that kind of stuff. But my suggestion is gonna be that we not go too far in the weeds with this, because we haven't finished with going through everything that's on the list, and we can come back to this at the end. And I lost track of whose group it was. The
it
turn.
is Nick's turn.
Yep. Let's see. We like the idea of having a representative body in the kind of proposal 2 at a constitutional convention proposed. We think it's a good idea to have representatives from local groups come together to ratify whatever final proposal we come to, so that there's broad agreement across all the chapters on what the future is going to look like.
I believe that the other group also had a constitution, that we liked having a constitutional convention piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was also voiced in our group.
So shall we do show of hands for liking the constitutional convention piece? And I see a request for clarification.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, Alan in our group voiced that we would need to kind of explore what that's going to look like before we kind of agree to it, and make sure that it's a agreed on process and fair and equal and things.
Yep. Cool. So let's note that. Back over to Quinn.
Yep. There was a general feeling that the first document feels exclusive and compromises diversity and pushes people away from the process.
Whoops, clarification. I think that was specifically offered in response to the thing about choosing its own members. So I think that needs to be grouped in there.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
All right, so if we're going to go back and talk about choosing its own members and stuff like that, we can discuss that more.
That's one, yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, and then the next point there is also related to that. Mm-hmm. So there was an opinion voiced that people liked the inclusion of SOS in the second document, but I'm also going to add on to that point that it wasn't exactly clear what SOS was because it wasn't spelled out. So those are kind of two that I'm joining together because they're related. So first, let's show of hands for the inclusion of the self-organizing system. Are there any concerns about using SOS, not what SOS is? And then show of hands for concern about spelling out, or show of hands for wanting the final document to clearly define SOS.
Or include links to some simplified thing about, yeah. And I see a concern from Nick.
Yeah, I just think that relates also to the kind of working group mandates and having a clear definition for what we're expecting from national. So I think those are connected with the kind of self-organizing system model.
Cool. So back over to you, Nick, for is there anything that we haven't mentioned yet in your group?
Yes. We think that one of the main goals for a national team should be facilitating collaboration between not just local and regional, but also internationally, so that we can promote voices from the global south and frontline communities abroad.
Okay, so show of hands for people who feel that National's role is also to reach out to the global south and collaborate internationally. Are there any concerns or, okay.
Alan?
My concern is that is an example of giving a lot of power to national to represent us on an international basis and with indigenous groups as a, the whole, to represent the whole of XR in that capacity.
Cool. So I'm trusting that is being noted, the concern that it could be given too much power to national if we are making them the liaison with regards to collaboration with internationally and also specifically with collaboration with indigenous groups. Okay. Cool.
Alan, you're muted.
Yeah, I have a second concern, which is the current national team is explicitly anti-international, and I don't see that functioning well.
Okay. So you're concerned about placing power for liaisoning with international at the national level is that the current team is very anti the international team. So yeah, thank you. Shall we have a show of hands for that concern? Okay. So I think it's back over to Quinn.
Yep. There was a voiced opinion that in the second proposal, the limitation of the decision-making body to being 15 people might make it more efficient, but also might make it less inclusive. And there should probably be a more thoughtful way to set up the group size, and it might seem arbitrary just setting it at 15 people, or maybe an explanation of why 15 people is the number for decision-making groups.
Yeah, and I'm wondering now if that is connected in part to the need for having more understanding about SOS, and also maybe what we've talked about before of exploring how to complement representation on bodies with some amount of sortition. Does that seem like it connects to those, to anyone?
Pam?
Yeah, that was my point in the group, was that as opposed to the third proposal that we're not looking at that has 60 people trying to make decisions, that putting some limit on it is helpful. However, making sure that there's a good process for making sure that there's representation of the diverse voices is really important. And so that was my question, was whether 15 was a number that people chose on purpose, or whether it was just something that they said, oh, how about 15?
Okay, great. Well, we can thank you for spelling that out. I think we can come back to that in a moment because we're almost done, I believe, with going through just the various things, so that we can just see how much agreement there is on things. I believe that's a part of SOS, but I think that going into all of SOS right now could get a bit complicated. So thank you, Quinn. Over to you, Nick.
As we talked about, we appreciate that both proposals include the support of the fourth demand in the U.S., and we think that that's necessary for the national team going forward.
Cool. Can we see a show of hands on that? Whoops, I can't hear you, Pam. It looked like you were saying something.
I said, I'm sorry, I missed the point because I was switching off of my headphones.
That people really liked that the fourth demand is highlighted in both proposals.
I think we actually, in our group, said that we liked that all demands and all principles were included in both proposals.
Cool, but including the fourth one, yes? Or because
yeah, yes, yep.
Just to put the elephant on the table, I've been hearing that there's 3D groups and 4D groups, and I just learned about all this very recently. So I think just to make it explicit that people here all were in favor of the fourth demand and all of the other ones. Yes? Okay. Cool. So back over to Quinn.
Sure. Oh wait, am I muted? No, I'm not.
Nope,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Yep. We talked about that. Let me just find the next one that we haven't talked about. We liked that the second proposal was explicit in its critiques of the first proposal. And that's not necessarily saying that we agree with all the critiques, but we liked that it spelled them out.
Show of hands.
Clarification from Nick.
Yeah, we liked that the second proposal is responding to the first one. I think there was agreement in our group, maybe not consensus, that instead of trying to point out where other proposals are bad or failing or the current structure is negative in the light, that we should try and just kind of lay out clearly how things go currently from either from national members or people who have seen it, and just kind of get a good baseline for how things have functioned, where we can improve on, and kind of collaborate together so that it's not as combative as has been in the past with XRUS.
Cool. So let's just maybe say that there's some nuance here, that some people appreciate that the critiques are spelled out and some people feel concerned that it could fuel some combativeness and would just prefer to have each proposal stand on its own grounds without yeah. So does that work? So back over to you, Nick.
Okay. We would like to explore the modified consensus and consent models that were mentioned in the two proposals. We're not sure which one would be more effective and would like to look into that further.
Oh, cool. So desire to explore further both consensus and modified consent. Okay. So then back over to you, Quinn.
Well, was there any concerns about?
Oh, sorry, concerns about exploring both of those further.
Okay. So the next point we had was have we already said that the critique of a delegate-based process versus a sortition process? Have we
I'm
already gone over that?
I'm not sure, but what I'm seeing here is this thing about that I think is important because it did come up in the group that someone said we'd like the idea of having a regional level and have some reservation about it taking up resources.
I think we went over that one already.
Oh, we did? Okay.
Yeah, that was Nick's first point, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
So what's our next one that we haven't talked about?
I think that we haven't talked about, as it relates to the second document, not particularly liking delegate-based processes, and or at least some of us in our group didn't like delegates as a solution, and perhaps and combining two of those was one solution was keeping delegates accountable by holding public meetings and having delegates, but allowing anyone who wants to show up to those meetings in order to keep the delegates accountable to the people that they are representing. And then another solution to that was not using delegates that are elected, but instead using delegates that are selected by sortition. So those being two alternatives to the system laid out in the second proposal, which said that delegates would be selected by the local chapters for the regional, and then regional delegates being selected for the national.
So I will reflect that, Quinn, and also break it down so that the hands can be clear.
Mm-hmm.
So how many people are aligned with a concern that representatives could be too exclusive and open to considering options like having meetings be open to people other than representatives as a way of keeping accountability at the meetings? And I see a concern from Monty. Yes, Monty.
I don't like the framing of the question. To me, it starts to muddle several things.
Okay.
One is, do you want a representative? In our group, we agreed we wanted representative. Then earlier in the coming together, there was the idea of sortition, and we said, I think generally among us agreed, it's worth exploring the sortition more. A second question then becomes, if you have either sortition or representatives, elect delegates, are there other methods to assure accountability, transparency, et cetera? And in which case, I'm fine. More methods of, that anybody could sit in, not necessarily to talk, but to sit in and listen if these things are available, clear notes. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff one can and should do to ensure that we know what's going on. But that's different from deciding how we'll have such a body.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So separating out whether it's sortition or representation, is there general support for having additional measures to ensure more accountability, including things like open meetings? So you still have a concern with that? Do you still have a concern?
I'm fine.
Oh, okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I think that's an important point, and thank you so much for the clarification. So back over to Nick.
Yep. So we talked about, we like having a set criteria for adding and removing people from the national team, but we also had concerns that some of the criteria might be subjective and hard to pursue in reality. Like breaking of principles was one where it's sometimes subjective, and some of us felt that people can break a principle once but still not necessarily need to be kicked out. There's opportunities to improve on that.
Okay. Need to improve on procedures for adding delegates and dismissing delegates. And is that with reference to the first proposal or to the second one?
I think the first one had the criteria for removing people that we liked. I think there might be something in the second as well. I'm not sure. But yeah, just that we should explore that more.
Okay. And so I'm a little confused because I think there was overwhelmingly support for that the existing national group should not be the one solely in charge of adding or removing people. And so then, in addition, it sounds like we're saying that those criteria need to be further worked on, but that it should not be the national. I mean, is that still within the purview of that it's not the national group that is doing that? I'm just a bit confused. Monty?
I think maybe we earlier had, I think, generally agreed we wanted either delegates or maybe delegate sortition. We didn't want a self-perpetuating body.
Right.
We were pretty clear on that. The question becomes, how then can people be removed from the body? So one is recall, which I think we do, and the other is in what we kind of, I thought, agreed, but maybe not, that the body could say, no, you're dysfunctional, you're not coming to meetings or whatever, we need to remove you. And I think this gets at, under what criteria can you do that? You know, what does it mean that, you know, so not attendance, so one of them said you missed 3 out of 5 meetings. Okay, whatever the number is, that's a fairly clear criteria. But like being disruptive or not living up to a principle or not supporting one of the demands, that gets tricky. And so it may be that it's simply a call for any authority the national body has to remove a member needs to be very clearly spelled out.
Okay.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Cool. So show of hands on that one. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Rosa, I just wanted to mention it. I had a hard stop at the top of the hour, so I did pass on the hosting to Nick. So you're now the host. If I leave the meeting, it'll stop the recording. So if someone wants to record the last part, or you're not worried about that,
I'd be happy if. Thank you so much for all your help, Edwin. I would like it if somebody did. And I'm not going to do it because I'm on my cell right now. So Quinn or Nick or someone, would you be willing to start your recording?
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll do it, Nick. All right, great.
Yep.
Thanks so much,
okay,
Edwin.
Thanks. Sorry, I couldn't stay longer.
I just need to jump in because I have to go also.
Yeah,
and thank you, Edwin, but thank everybody for a really thoughtful, productive, respectful, useful process. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
Monty.
Edwin. Thanks, Monty.
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge that we are at the top of the hour. If anyone is willing to stay another 15 minutes, I think we can get through both lists, but I also really understand if people can't. So